All right, so we learned how to add and subtract integers, or like I like to call it, combine integers, last two classes ago. Today we're going to be learning how to multiply and divide the integers. So that's the title of our lesson, multiplying and dividing integers. Now, multiplying and dividing integers is easier than adding and subtracting and combining. The rule is not as complicated. So here is the rule. It's the same rule for both multiplying and dividing. So the rule is when multiplying or dividing integers, you will multiply or divide like normal. That's the first thing you'll do. All right. Then you're going to count your negative signs. If the number is even, your answer will be positive. If the number is odd, your answer will be negative. Okay, if you don't totally understand this yet, that's fine. We're going to do practice problems and I'm going to keep explaining it. But let me highlight some important things. So, um, if it's even, your answer is positive. I'm just trying to get a different color. Hold on one second. If it's odd, that's not a good color. Hold on. There we go. If it's odd, your answer is negative. All right. So this is what I mean by that. Let's say we had a problem that said something like this. Let me get a practice problem. All right. So if I said something like, now please make sure that you know that if there's parentheses and no plus or minus sign in between, that means it's multiplication. So if I said something like 4 and then in parentheses negative 3, the fact that there's no plus or minus sign right here in between the 4 and the parentheses means that this is multiplication. So parentheses here mean multiply. So I said the first thing, the rule for multiplying and dividing integers, even when there's negative numbers, I said the first thing you're going to do is multiply or divide like normal. So you're going to ignore the negative right now and you're just going to multiply 4 times 3. 4 times 3 is 12. Okay? That's the first step. The second thing, the second part of the rule said you're going to count the negative sign. So you're literally going to go in there and you're going to count. Well, is the 4 negative? No, it's not, but the 3 is. So that's how many negative signs in this problem? Well, there's only one negative sign in this problem, right? Now, if the number 1 is odd, well, actually, if the number 1 is even, your answer would be positive, but since number 1 is odd, your answer is negative. So your final answer here would be negative 12. Now, if I gave you a different problem, like let's say it said negative 4 times negative 3. Okay, again, we're going to multiply like normal first. We're going to say, okay, we're going to ignore the negatives. We're going to say 4 times 3, which we know is 12. And now let's count our negative signs. Well, this time the 4 is negative, and so is the 3. So how many negative signs are there? There's 2 negative signs, right? Now the number 2, is that an even number or an odd number? Well, it's an even number. So when there's an even amount of negative signs, that means your answer is positive. And I don't need to put the positive sign, so your final answer would be positive 12. I'm going to let you guys try one now. All right, so those parentheses, there's 2 parentheses this time, but once again, it means multiply because there is no sign in between the 2 parentheses. So I want you to pause the video, and I want you to do this practice problem and then unpause it, and we will go through it. All right, now that you have done this problem, all right, I know it's multiplication, and I'm going to multiply like normal. I'm going to ignore the negatives right now. I'm going to say 13 times 3, and 13 times 3 is 39. Now I have to count the number of negative signs. Well, the 13 is not negative, but the 3 is. So how many negative signs were there here? 1. And the number 1, is that an even number or an odd number? Well, the number 1 is an odd number, right? And when the number of negative signs is odd, your answer is negative. So your final answer should be negative 39. All right. What about something like this? All right, now we don't have just 2 numbers being multiplied together. Now we have 3 numbers that are all being multiplied together. So 7 times negative 6 times negative 2. So once again, we're going to just multiply like normal right away. So we're going to say, okay, 7 times 6 is 42, and 42 times this 2 is going to be 84. Now we're not done. All we did is multiply them. Now we got to go back and count the negative signs. All right, so 7 is not negative, but the 6 is, and so is the 2. So how many negative signs were in this problem? Well, there's 2 negative signs, and the number 2 is even. And when the number is even, that means it's a positive 84. So your final answer would be 84. All right, I'm going to give you guys one to try now. All right, you could pause the video and try this. All right. Now that you have worked out this problem, let's start solving it. So we're going to first notice that it's multiplication, and we're going to multiply like normal. We're going to say 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times 2 is 24, and 24 times 1 is 24. I ignored the negative signs and I just multiplied. 4 times 3, which is 12, 12 times 2, which is 24, and then 24 times 1, which is 24. Now that I did that, now I have to go back though and count my negative signs. So the 4 is not negative, but the 3 is, so is the 2, and so is the 1. So how many negative signs are there? 3 this time. And the number 3 is odd. So when there's an odd amount of negatives, your answer is negative. So your final answer would be negative 24. All right, I'm going to give you one to try on your own. All right, I want you to pause the video and try this one, and we will discuss it when you're done. All right, now that you have worked this problem out, let's talk about it. So it's all multiplication, so we'll multiply 8 times 2, which is 16, 16 times 3, which is going to be 10, 20, 30, 48. And then 48 times that 2 is going to be 96. All right, now that we multiplied all of our numbers together, now let's count our negative signs. So, all right, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 negative signs, and the number 4 is even. So when you have an even amount of negatives, your answer is positive. So your final answer would be positive 96. All right. So that is how we multiply. Now let's talk about dividing. So dividing is exactly the same, except instead of multiplying, we're going to divide. So if I gave you a problem like, let's see, get a good problem for you to do. First of all, we're not going to see this division sign like this very often. Okay, sometimes you'll see that, but the higher you get into math, the less often you'll see that division symbol. Instead, you'll see a fraction bar. So if I said something like 20 over 5, that fraction bar really means to divide. So what that really is saying is 20 divided by 5, but we don't usually use that division sign. Instead, we use a fraction bar. So when you see a fraction bar, realize that that is the same as division. Okay? So let us do a practice problem with division. All right. Oops. All right. 14 over negative 7. I just told you that that fraction bar means division. So that's really like saying 14 divided by negative 7. So the same rule applies. You're just going to divide like normal, pretend like there's no negative sign. So we're going to say 14 divided by 7 is 2. And now we're going to go back and we're going to count our negative signs. Well, 14 is not negative. The 7 is. So there's one negative sign. The number 1 is odd. So when you have an odd number of negative signs, your answer is negative. So negative 2. All right. What about this one? Negative 45 divided by negative 5. All right, again, it's division, so we're going to divide like normal. 45 divided by 5 is 9. And now we're going to go in and we're going to count our negative signs. So 45 is negative, so is the 5. There's 2 negative signs. The number 2 is even. And when you have an even amount of negatives in your problem, that means your answer is positive. Now, make sure you're not confusing this with adding and subtracting integers. When you're adding and subtracting, or like I usually say, combining, make sure you're following the rules that we talked about already about combining. They're different rules. This is just for multiplying and dividing where you count the number of negatives like this. All right, I'm going to give you guys one to practice. All right. So pause the video and try this one. All right, let's now begin. So we're going to divide like normal. 21 divided by 3 is 7. We're going to now go in and count our negative signs. 21 is positive, but the 3 is negative, so there's one negative. The number 1 is odd. So when you have an odd amount of negatives, that means your answer is negative. So your answer there would be negative 7. All right, let you practice one more. All right, pause the video and try this one. All right, now that you have practiced this one on your own, let's talk about it. So this is division. So we're going to pretend like the negatives are not there at first, and we're just going to divide. 500 divided by 25. Well, 25 goes into 100 4 times, so that means it goes into 500 20 times, right? 5 times 4, so 20. 500 divided by 25 is 20. Now we're going to go in and count our negative signs. Well, there's 2 negatives. The number 2 is even, and when you have an even amount of negative signs, your answer is positive 20. All right. One last thing before I end the notes. Let's talk about something like this. All right, this has multiplication and division in the same problem. So the numerator, which is the top of the fraction, you can see that there's multiplication. All right, so we're going to take care of that first. So we're going to say, okay, let's do 3 times 2, which is 6. Okay, now we're going to count the negatives. There's 1 negative, 2 negatives, so the number 2 is even. And when there's an even amount of negatives, that means your answer is positive. So the numerator is positive 6, but the denominator is negative 6. So now we have a problem that says positive 6 divided by negative 6. So we'll divide like normal. 6 divided by 6 is 1. And now we'll go in and we'll count our negative signs. So there's 1 negative. The number 1 is odd. And when you have an odd amount of negatives, that means your answer is negative. So the final answer would be negative 1. I'm going to give you one to try, and then we will be done with the notes for today. All right. All right, pause the video, and you could try this one on your own. All right, let's go over this one now. So once again, the numerator has some multiplication in there that you need to take care of. So we're going to multiply 7 times 4, which is 28. And then when I count the negative signs in the numerator, there's 1 negative, and the number 1 is odd. So when you have an odd amount of negatives, your answer is negative. So the numerator is negative 28 divided by the denominator, which is negative 2. Now we have to take care of this new problem, which is 28 divided by 2, which is 14. Now let's go in and count those negative signs. So the 28 is negative, and so is the 2. So there's 2 negative signs. Oops, this was supposed to. Oh, I'm sorry, I had to think about that for a second. I got confused for a second. I apologize. All right, so there's 2 negative signs. So the number 2 is even. And when there's an even amount of negatives, that means your answer is positive. So your answer, final answer here is positive 14. That's the lesson for today. So good luck. Make sure you're doing the assignment, and we will talk about this lesson some more next class. All right, thank you.